Hi, my name is Juan and today I'm here to talk about Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. But before I get into the novel, I want to talk to you a little bit about Dickens as a man and as a writer because I think it's going to be relevant, okay? So Charles Dickens was born in Hampshire, which is in the south of England, in 1812. But he spent most of his childhood in Kent before his family finally settled in London. Now, Dickens doesn't hail from a working class family, but he was familiar with the indignity working class people had to put up with in England, among other things because his father went to prison because he owed debts. At some point in his childhood, Dickens even had to leave school and work in a warehouse. And this is all relevant because Dickens's childhood experiences tend to make their way into many of his novels, including Great Expectations, particularly when he writes about working children, which is not really the case here, but it's still relevant. Another relevant fact of Dickens's biography is his work as a journalist. Some of his contemporaries considered him more a journalist than an artist, but this didn't seem to bother Dickens much, I don't think. What mattered to him was to be read by a wide audience, and he was. All his novels came up in installments on the press before being published in 3 volumes first and then single volumes. Also, it was common back then in the 19th century for people to attend readings. Now, this allowed even a wider audience to have access to Dickens's writing at the time because not everyone knew how to read and write back then. His work as a reporter, the access he had to all layers of society also informed his work. Now, Dickens is a key author if we want to study England in the 19th century. But even audiences at the time would find out what was going on by reading Dickens, or more likely by attending one of his readings. Now, the fact that Dickens included references to what was going on at the time in real life might have been great for his contemporary readers because it kept them informed, but it can be hard for us because many of those references can go right over our heads. And you know, Dickens, like a modern soap opera writer, also cared about the audience's reaction to his writing to the point of changing the course of some characters depending on the audience's response. Now, this is something that can be hard for us to get our heads around, but we must try. Okay, novelists now sit down, write a book from beginning to end, and sure, some key people read it before publication or as it is being written. You know, that's what editors are for. But once a novel is finished, it comes out as it is. Now, but that's not how Dickens wrote his novels. He wrote by installments that came out every 2 weeks. So he could gauge what was working and what was not and make changes accordingly. But now we are presented with his novels as single volumes, which means mainly 2 things. The first thing is that we don't get to enjoy his writing like his contemporaries were. We don't have to wait for the next installment. But 2, we are no longer part of the process. We have a finished text in our hands and we as readers cannot influence the development of the plot. Now, Great Expectations is a great example of what I'm talking about because he wrote 2 endings for it. The original ending is sad and realistic, and the rewrite is a lot happier. Why did he do that? Because audience response. Now, Dickens is a canonical writer, but sometimes his work is seen as minor when compared to other writers of his time because of things like that. When a writer alters the course of a novel's plot or even his ending just to please his audience, that takes away some of the artistic value or literary merit according to some people. Now, I have a BA in English Studies and an MA in English Literature, and I never had to study Dickens, and it's probably because of things like that. But I would say that Dickens nowadays, I would say that his novels are seen a lot more worthy of study than they were during his lifetime or shortly after. His fiction actually only began to be seen in that light in the 20th century. Before that, he was mostly considered a hack. You know, his commercial success was also part of the problem. A writer who is as popular as Dickens and who sells as many books as he did and continues to do takes longer to be taken seriously by academia and by critics. Dickens's works appeal to all kinds of readers. His readership has always been a mix of educated and popular readers. His writing is accessible when many critics expect good literature to be difficult to understand. Now, another part of the problem is the implicit critique of capitalism in all his novels. Dickens denounces the exploitation of children and the terrible living conditions in English towns. Those elements of his fiction were sometimes ignored or at least what bourgeois readers highlighted about Dickens's novels was the conservative vision of society they found in them. Although academia didn't take him seriously until into the 20th century, he was a beloved author during his lifetime, much beloved. Dickens died in 1870 at the age of 58. He was by far the most popular writer in Victorian times. We can even think of him as the first celebrity author. All that being said, Great Expectations is often hailed as his best book, although it may not be his most popular. That's hard to say. Dickens was a prolific writer. He wrote a lot of books, and perhaps Great Expectations is the one, I think, who best encapsulates his writing in terms of style, themes, and so on, while also being the novel in which he reined in some of the excesses present in his other novels. I'd say that everything that makes Dickens what he is concentrated in Great Expectations. In general, I'm not a huge fan of his writing, but I love Great Expectations. I still wouldn't say that Great Expectations is necessarily his best novel, though. But I would say that, to me, Great Expectations is the one novel by Dickens that has the largest potential to speak to a contemporary audience. For me, Great Expectations is the most relevant of his novels. Why? Because unfortunately, we still live in a time of extreme inequality and social injustice, just like the word portrayed in Great Expectations. David Copperfield and perhaps to a lower degree Oliver Twist can also be relevant to us because of the same reason or similar reasons. But yeah, David Copperfield and Oliver Twist belong to an earlier phase in Dickens's writing, and one can perceive a certain level of optimism in them, while Great Expectations is one of his last novels, which tend to be instilled with pessimism. Now, Great Expectations is a Bildungsroman, or a coming-of-age story of an orphan named Philip Perrip, nicknamed Pip. Great Expectations is a first-person narration, so the story is told by Pip himself. Pip is a working-class character. The protagonist/narrator grows up in rural Kent, raised by his sister, Georgiana Maria, and her husband, Joe Granger, who is a blacksmith. Now, Joe is a father figure to Pip, and young Pip admires him greatly. Pip is an intelligent lad, full of potential. An anonymous benefactor one day gives him the chance to become a gentleman. Great Expectations is about Pip's coming of age. The novel charts his progress from a rural childhood and extreme poverty to becoming a gentleman. Once in London, Pip has the opportunity to become an educated and sophisticated man. Pip falls in love with Stella, Stella is a girl his age, more or less, who lives with the wealthy and eccentric reclusive Miss Havisham in a mansion. Miss Havisham had been jilted by his fiancé and hates all men as a result, including Pip. She wears her wedding dress every day as a reminder and tries to teach her adopted daughter Stella to hate men as much as she does. Early on, Pip learns that nothing is going to be easy for him in life, and there will always be a cost for everything. At the novel's opening, Pip meets another key character, a prisoner named Magwitch, he also goes by other names, to whom Pip brings food. Throughout the novel, Pip learns that what matters in life is friendship and solidarity. In Great Expectations, the characters go through different narrative events that make them think and reflect on who they are. The characters reflect, so there's introspection in this novel. But it would be an exaggeration and a mistake, I think, to say that Great Expectations is a psychological novel. Dickens portrays a society where people are judged very superficially. I don't know if that reminds you of anything, you know. So I think that criticizing Dickens for not going deep into the psychology of his characters in this book misses the point. I think the society that Dickens portrays in Great Expectations favors that people only know each other superficially. However, Great Expectations is not a superficial novel. It is not a beach novel. Great Expectations is set in the most heavily industrialized nation on Earth at the time, and the very center of a huge exploitative empire. Despite all the promise that could hold, Dickens shows us the high cost of human suffering, not in the colonies, but in the metropolis itself, in England. Even if you're not a fan of Dickens, Great Expectations is worth a read. If you don't own a copy of the novel, I've added links to different editions and other books by Dickens I mentioned in this video, which are all available from the book depository down in the description box for this video. If you buy any book using my links, I'll receive a tiny, small commission. You'll receive your books without delivery fees worldwide and will support my channel without having to pay anything extra. Now, Great Expectations is a good place to start with Dickens, I think, because it cuts a lot of the fat that many modern readers do not have the patience for and that we find in many of his other novels.